Okay, great. And now, without further ado, thank you everyone for coming to this very special virtual panel discussion with Charley Beal and Michelle Millar Fisher. The Heckscher Museum of Art is very proud to present this program as free and open to the public. And I would like to thank everyone who's joining us tonight and for your support of the museum. Before we proceed, please note that if you'd like to turn on closed captioning, you can click on the CC button below. My name is Jessica Rosen. I'm the Curatorial Assistant here at the Heckscher, and I will be moderating tonight's discussion. Joining me on screen are my two panel speakers, Michelle Millar Fisher and Charley Beal. Charley Beal is a lifelong activist and award-winning art director for film and television and president of the Gilbert Baker Foundation. Beal worked closely with Gilbert Baker beginning in 1994 when he assisted Baker in the creation of the mile-long rainbow flag for Stonewall 25 and continued to collaborate with him on various Pride celebrations around the globe. Michelle Millar Fisher is the Ronald C. and Anita L. Warnick Curator of Contemporary Decorative Arts at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Millar Fisher was largely responsible for adding the rainbow flag to the permanent collection at the MoMA and published a children's book that tells the story of the creation of the Pride flag along with the wonderful illustrations of San Francisco-based artist Kat Kwong. In our discussion, Charley and Michelle will be responding to some of your questions, so please type them in the Q&A box on your screen or the chat box at any time. And without further ado, I will now begin the panel discussion. Thank you everyone again for bearing with us during some technical difficulties, and I'm so excited. So the first question is for Charley. And so I wanted to give everyone some background as to how this panel came to be. Part of the inspiration for it is that several of the paintings currently on view in the Heckscher Museum, that's part of the George Gross The Stickmen show, feature a rainbow flag. To viewers today, Gross's imagery might call to mind the LGBTQ pride flag. However, this symbol was created as a queer symbol more than 3 decades after Gross's use. So I would like to begin this talk by asking Charley about the many uses of the rainbow flag before its designation as a symbol for the LGBTQ+ community.
Thank you so much, Jessica. The rainbow as a symbol was actually very pervasive in all ancient cultures. Of course, rainbows were everywhere every time after a rainstorm, but you know, from Egypt to Norway, Australia, China, South America. And I think one thing really common about them, by the way, was they were always a sign of hope. Kind of makes sense. The storm is over. As a matter of fact, in Western culture, the book of Genesis in the Old Temple tells a story about God sent a rainbow to Noah as a sign that of hope that the end of the great flood was over, even though, you know, God had killed everybody. But if you go to the next slide, you can see that as well. And then the next one in what is now Nigeria, the Yoruba tribe, they worshiped a god named Oshimaru. He was an Oshiri god with a rainbow skirt who lived half the year as a woman and half the year as a man. That's the next slide, please. And very interesting. I found this out when a woman named Yolanda Crenshaw contacted the foundation, and she was very adamant that, you know, it wasn't Gilbert Baker, it was Oshimaru, it was Oshimaru. And I said, well, maybe the night that Gilbert Baker had his revelation about the rainbow flag, he got a little visitation from one of the Oshiri gods. Anyway, but the actual first flag, if you go to the next slide, was probably around the 17th century, the Bundschuh labor movement in Germany, where they actually put the rainbow on a piece of fabric and used it as a flag. And then soon after that, Thomas Paine, if you go to the next slide, he suggested that the early American Navy fly rainbow flags in international waters as a sign of neutrality. So, you know, Gilbert, as he said, he didn't invent the rainbow flag, as he liked to say, he just put it to work. Most recently in the 20th century, if you go to the next slide, the cooperative movement started using a rainbow flag. The colors were a little odd. The arrangement wasn't what we see today. And the Maher Baba group started using it in the 20s. And in the 50s, there was a movement to make the rainbow flag the world flag. If you see that brochure in the middle there, can you imagine? I don't think Gilbert would have chosen it if it would have been the world flag, but it kind of is the world flag nowadays. But anyway, then if you go to the next slide, in 1969 or so, John Sinclair, who was a crazy radical activist and the head of the White Panthers, his group kind of morphed into what's called the Rainbow People's Gathering. And these are a bunch of hippies that gather in the woods every year to this day, somewhere in Oregon or in Pennsylvania. They move around the whole country and they sit around and smoke a lot of pot and wave rainbow flags. And so it was there. It was in the air when Gilbert, came time for him to start thinking about this. And it was a really big deal in terms of the summer love all the way back to 67. It was a big hippie icon, the rainbow. So when Harvey Milk from Woodmere, Long Island, thank you, go to the next slide. I'm from Woodmere, New York. There's the slide right there. So when Harvey Milk, the legendary San Francisco politician, tasked Gilbert Baker with coming up with a new symbol for the growing LGBTQ rights movement, there were rainbows all around him. His best friend and roommate was a woman named Lynn Segerblom, aka the Rainbow Fairy Argyle. And he was also making costumes for Rainbow the Clown at the same time because he lived at the Clown Hotel. What can I say? It was San Francisco, it was the 70s. So that's how it came about.
That is amazing. And it's so interesting to hear how all of these different groups have, employed it and thought about it over the years. And with that being said, moving on to the next question, as there were already multiple symbols representing the queer community before this pride flag was designated as such. So I was wondering if you could share with us why and how Gilbert Baker chose to designate the rainbow flag as the pride flag, which involves Harvey Milk.
From Long Island.
From Long Island.
They're really proud of that. They've in Bayshore, they've just started just a couple years ago, kind of in his honor after the movie Milk came out, a big pride celebration. So it's spreading everywhere, even still. Anyway, before Gilbert Baker chose the rainbow flag as an emblem for the queer community, the pink triangle and the Greek lambda were the two, more common symbols in the growing queer movement. They never really caught on. The pink triangle was a symbol of oppression. It was put on homosexuals by the Nazis. It didn't really fill the bill as the sign of hope that Harvey Milk urged Gilbert to create. And the Greek lambda, well, it was just academic and obscure, and people were putting it on banners and nobody knew what it was and why was it, queer. It just, so there were already symbols out there, but they just didn't catch on. So Harvey was asking Gilbert to do this in the spring of 1978. Harvey Milk had just been elected as the San Francisco supervisor, one of America's earliest LGBTQ plus elected politicians. Anyway, but 2 years previous to that, in 1976, the United States had a bicentennial celebration. And Gilbert was, awed by the power of the rainbow, of the American flag. He saw, on t-shirts and, the way it was used for the bicentennial. He saw how it was branding this whole event. And, flags are flags are really, really powerful symbols. People march into war under a flag, they will die under a flag. And let me tell you, they're very potent symbols. If I went outside Museum of Modern Art today and burned my shirt in New York City, people would just keep walking. But if you burn a flag, the reporters will come, and it starts they're infused with such power. And so Gilbert decided that even before he figured out it was going to be a rainbow, he wanted to make a flag. So as he then recounted to the San Francisco Examiner in the early 80s, and he wrote about it in his book, Rainbow Warrior, he was out dancing at a concert with his friend Cleve Jones. They were best friends. Cleve was very famous, went on to create the AIDS quilt. I don't know if it had to do with the drugs they were taking, but Gilbert was blown away by the diversity of the crowd that he saw that night. And it was, in his words, the rainbow of humanity. I mean, that was his epiphany. And that was where it was born, the modern day LGBTQ plus rainbow flag, a flag for all sexes, all genders, all races, and all ages. Like he said, the rainbow of humanity. And I point this out because, like I said, the rainbow was all around him. He didn't think it up. But that night that he wrote about, he came up with this concept of the rainbow of humanity. And he gave a very famous speech 10 years later to the North American Vexillological Association. That's it's association of people who study flags. And to the Association of Vexillologique, the International Association, they were having a conference in San Francisco. In 1987, he gave a very passionate speech about the idea of this rainbow of humanity, and that if you remove one color from it, that it all falls apart and the family of man is no longer whole. So it was this epiphany about what that rainbow would symbolize that really, struck him. And that's where our flag has come from. And so he got together about 30 volunteers. If you can go to the next slide, and with a help of two key collaborators, Ferry Argyle and James McNamara, and a lot of other volunteers. They set up sewing machines and giant dye vats, and they created these two huge 30-foot by 60-foot flags that debuted at the 1978 Gay Freedom Day Parade. And you can show that picture next. And you can see how big they are. And that's Gilbert there on the right. And you can see this is, at this point, the flag had 8 colors, not 6. A year later, they simplified it to 6 colors because the flag companies were just running out of pink and turquoise. They literally, it was an economic decision. They said, if you want this flag to be a worldwide phenomenon, you got to use the colors that flag companies have. But one thing I think that's important is a lot of people think there's an L stripe, a G stripe, a B stripe, and a T stripe, and so forth. But that's not really how they decided to do it. They talked about it, and Gilbert, again, wrote about this in his book, but they didn't want to assign identities to the colors because they knew that our community was expanding in ways they couldn't even imagine in 78. They knew it then. I mean, Gilbert was genderqueer. He used to sew in a dress. Nobody had invented the term yet, so they knew that our community was going to grow and evolve. So instead of using identities, they used human elements, assigned them to the colors: pink for sex, red for life, orange for healing, yellow for sunlight, green for nature, turquoise for magic and art, blue for serenity, and purple for spirit. And they debuted those flags on June 25th, 1978. And Gilbert always says that from the moment they left his hand and the wind took them away, he knew exactly what he would do with the rest of his life. He would go on to spend the next 39 years making the rainbow flag the most recognizable symbol of hope and liberation ever created by human hands.
I love that.
That is, how do you even follow that up? I mean, that is truly so powerful. But to continue moving on, so after we have this wonderful epic tale, which Charley has told so wonderfully, Michelle, you have a children's book called The Rainbow Flag, Bright, Bold, and Beautiful, illustrated by Kat Kwong, which tells this story about Baker and his friends illustrating the flag. And I'm wondering if you could share some of this story as well as what inspired you to write it.
Absolutely. And so, well, maybe if we go, we can flick through some of the interior. This is the cover of the book and some of the interior illustrations of the book. Why did we write this story? Well, as you just told it, Charley, it's a pretty great story. It's wonderful. It's incredibly inspirational, and it's about design. And at the time I was working at MoMA, I'm now here at the MFA in Boston. But I was working in a design department for a really wonderful mentor and a senior curator, Paola Antonelli. And so design was part of our everyday conversation. part of that conversation was whose design stories are told, how are they told, what isn't told within the museum, and how could they be? And so we also had a phenomenal publications department at MoMA, the museum still does, which had a fairly established children's book making program as well. And actually, part of my time, during my time at MoMA, museum jobs don't always pay enough to make rent in New York. So I was a nanny for at least half of the time that I was at MoMA. And I would spend a lot of time reading children's books. I love writing books in general. I've written for all ages and stages, but this was the first children's book. And I pitched this one because the story was important, because it told a story that hadn't necessarily been told in this way before. And because I think it was really interesting to envision a story for a younger audience, to be able to tell people how the world around them is designed, to inspire them to design their own worlds, and to think about a really brilliant design that came out of looking at the world, looking out of nature, looking at communities around Gilbert and his friends and colleagues, and then creating a design from that has really gone on to change the world. It was important to me. I don't identify as somebody from the LGBTQ community. I am an ally. And so for me, the words and the notion of the story is important. We had the resources to do this at MoMA. But it was very important to partner with an illustrator or an artist who did identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community. And so I did a lot of research. I had a PowerPoint that's probably about 70 illustrators long, trying to figure out who might be the best person to invite to do this. And they were illustrators who'd done a lot of work. They were illustrators who hadn't done any work. And I was so lucky to find Kat's work, actually. They're phenomenal. They live in San Francisco. They have for a long time. They are now partnered with their wife. They've since had one baby. Another one is on the way. We're actually both pregnant at the moment. And so they had done some wonderful illustration work, but they hadn't had the opportunity to do a project like this. And when you work at a place like MoMA that has resources to make really beautiful books, it's a lovely thing to be able to connect with an artist who really deserves that platform to let their work shine. It was, somewhat easy to write the words for this book. It wasn't the longest manuscript I've ever had to turn in, but it wouldn't have come alive without Kat's work. And I had a colleague of mine really thoughtfully ask, well, why should you be involved in this? This is not a community that you are necessarily part of, you're allied with, but it's not something that, you necessarily have this stake or experience in. And my response at the time was like, well, no one else has done it yet. And this is a story that deserves to be told. There were plenty of opportunities for people to acquire this work into the museum. The flag had been around for quite some decades by the time we did bring it into the museum. Same thing with thinking about a children's book. Nobody had pitched it yet. And so for me, it was important to tell this story, to do it for this particular audience, but to do it in a way that was thoughtful about its process. For me, it was a genuinely lovely collaboration with Kat. It's someone who I still keep in touch with, have very deep respect and affection for, and whose illustrations made the book. I wrote the words, but it would be nothing without her illustrations as part of it. And so as you've seen through the pages that you've shown, it tells the story both of Gilbert making the flag itself, along with many, many collaborators in San Francisco in 1978. And then right at the end, it tells the story of that flag coming into MoMA's collection.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. I don't know if I can go back, but this page right here is like one of my favorites. It's so sweet, and it shows the like playful nature of all of these people working together. And I feel really like captures this moment of community where it's, just a group of people like doing their best and running with these dyed pieces of fabric flowing down the street. It's so visceral. And I think that also shows how great your partnership with Kat was and how strong it was that you could make these images come to life.
She did such a great job. A lot of the story manuscript that I wrote and then sent to her came from conversations that I was lucky enough to have with Gilbert at MoMA before he passed. And yeah, this is the part of the story where he talks about, they had vats at the community center where they created the kind of baseline materials to make the flag with, but they needed to fix them. So they went down to the laundrette. And the laundrette was not very happy because there were all of these dyes in their washing machines. And so they got chased out of there in the end once they had done the first cycle. So they had fixed it enough, but they had to finish off the task back at the community center. So yeah, Kat was working with materials that were sort of coming directly from Gilbert, retelling this story as he'd been kind enough to do over several sessions at MoMA.
It's honestly, it's magical. And I think you really captured that in this book. And now also to kind of shift this conversation a little bit, obviously you did this when you were working at the MoMA. And so I really would like to hear more about how and why the MoMA actually formally acquired the Pride flag into their collection. And I'm really interested in that as we consider what it means for something that's mass produced, something that anyone could buy at the store, and what it means to have that in a fine arts collection.
Absolutely. And so it's a really interesting question, and I have to give huge credit to the person who I was lucky enough to be mentored by when I was at MoMA. I was a junior curator there for 4 years, and I really learned what I do in curatorial now from Paola Antonelli, who's a phenomenal, world-renowned contemporary design curator who's been at MoMA for over 3 decades and has really sort of set the parameters by which many folks in the design field understand what it is to be a living designer or make things or remake our worlds around us as everyday people. And Paola had actually brought into the museum several signs and symbols as part of the contemporary collection in the couple years before we brought in Gilbert's flag in 2015. And she'd done it in a way that was kind of provocative, deliberately so in a sense. She brought in the @ sign, the thing that we now use as part of email protocol, and was encoded as such in the early 1970s. She had been bringing typography, digital typography into the collection, and had sort of expanded that particular collecting strategy to bring in the symbol of the @ sign. She then brought in the Google Maps pin. And by bring into the collection, I mean, you know, Google Maps does actually have IP and ownership, but the @ sign is really anybody's to use. And much like the rainbow flag has had multiple histories through ledgers and economics and other cultural contexts over time. And so as I was sitting and brainstorming one day, I was like, you know what? There are other signs and symbols that might be nice to add to this collection that Paola has started. And so one of them was actually the emojis. I proposed those and they came into the collection as well. Very, very much facilitated, not just by Paola, but by a phenomenal collection specialist who's still there at the museum today, Paul Galloway. But the rainbow flag was one of them too. And I didn't know its history, but I thought about it. And I thought, I'll see if I can find anything online. And then lo and behold, Gilbert lived in New York at the time. We was in New York at the time. And so I reached out to him, not necessarily expecting to get a response. And he did respond. And so began our conversation of thinking like, okay, so how might we bring this work into the collection? Some of these signs and symbols like the @ sign have been the idea of it, and we can blow it up as a big vinyl on a wall if we put it into an exhibition of design, for example. But some of them have been physical objects as well. And the mass-produced nature of it, picking a mass-produced item, really, again, comes down to a protocol that MoMA has hewn to for quite a while. And here you see Gilbert at MoMA under the flag that was lifted in June of 2015 as we celebrated the acquisition. You can see the Google Maps pin right next to him. So this was in a space where we were showing other signs and symbols. But we wanted the prototype because so much, the majority of MoMA's contemporary design collection, and again, this comes back to Paola, but also her predecessors who have thought through design for the masses. MoMA is his sort of mission statement is the art of our time, and we might extrapolate that to the art and design of our time. And so that often means in a contemporary design collection that it's not the prototype, it's not the working materials, it's the thing that everybody else can get their hands on, or at least could. You know, some of the designs in MoMA I could not afford. Some of them you can, though. You've got the OXO Good Grips peeler, for example. You've got many things that are deeply embedded in our everyday lives. And in fact, Paola did a great show back in 2004 called Humble Masterpieces that looked at everything from the condom to the Chubba Chop to the Bic pen, these things that have amazing design histories, the Post-it note, for example, but are not necessarily written into the canonical histories, which we often think of about the, you know, the chair, the single family home for an architect, for example. So that's why we chose the mass-produced item, because it was in line with the collecting strategies of the museum.
Well, that is a very logical answer and makes sense. And I think it's also like really interesting how something that really like made sense at that exact time has these ripples so many years later. Like I would have never guessed or known that you were interested in those type of things at that time.
It was an interesting time to be in the design collection. And it helped me think through projects in the future. This notion that design that's, it's much like Gilbert was thinking about the rainbow as something that was out there in nature, in the world, and had been used in other ways, as Charley described, but could be purloined, brought into, mobilized for different means at a specific historical moment. And I think a lot of MoMA's design collection also trades on those ideas.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense to me. Okay. I also want to just show these lovely pictures of Gilbert and Michelle together.
I looked a lot younger, Jessica.
No.
I had less crow's feet then. But yeah, this is the end of the children's book where we talk a little bit about how we acquired the work into the collection.
Amazing. And there she is hanging. Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit again. And I want to talk about this present moment where Charley, you are the president of the Gilbert Baker Foundation. And I want to talk about that work that you do and how you keep his legacy alive today. And I also want to note that Michelle served on the board of the Gilbert Baker Foundation as well.
Yes, she does. She's one of the first people I asked. Well, those of us who volunteer to run the Gilbert Baker Foundation, we never intended to run a foundation. Gilbert died unexpectedly in his sleep on March 17th of 2000, March 31st, 2017, get my dates mixed up. Anyway, and it was a shock and a surprise. We noticed he'd been slowing down, but nobody thought he was going to pass away. And so at first we were just trying to keep the lights on to keep his roommates from getting kicked out of the house, literally. And then we were helping the family, trying to gather his belongings. And I reached out to the GLBT Museum in San Francisco because Gilbert had mentioned to me once that he wanted his collection to go there. They sent a curator out. They, with my husband, they collected some of his flags and his gowns and his high heels and his wonderful sparkling, glittery props that he made. And so eventually we decided that we wanted to have a real good memorial for him. So we did it on Flag Day in 2017, June 14th, in front of Stonewall Inn. And a lot of the people, I kind of gathered a committee to do it because I don't know if you know how New York works. It's everybody's got an opinion. So I just thought if I get them all involved. Anyway, so I got a committee of 9 people, and most of those people are actually still on the board. And then one thing led to another. That led to publishing Gilbert's memoir, which he had written and never published. And people started, Nike wanted to do something. So eventually I called people like Michelle and people who are really experts in their field and put together a board. And today we have a regular 501c3. We do exhibitions, we do publications, and very happy to say we've done 2 really great exhibits. One is called In Their Own Voices, because about 4 or 5 years ago, people started noticing a lot of other community flags. You see, I've got a pin here with the trans flag and the rainbow flag and all our other community flags. And our board got together and said, what do we do? And we said, why don't we do an exhibit? I mean, Gilbert's the mother of all flags, and we figured these other flags are our children and we want to honor them. So we reached out to the creators of these other flags, and we did an exhibit called In Their Own Voices. We opened it at the Stonewall Inn. It was also in San Francisco at Harvey Milk's Camera Shop in Provincetown. It's also been in Paris. I'm happy to report, Michelle, that we opened that exhibit in the Stonewall Inn, 3 years ago? It's still there. Stacy loves that exhibit. People are crazy about it. So we did that exhibit, and then a year later we did an exhibit. We collaborated with a group called Report Out in the United Kingdom on a exhibit called Flag in the Map. And what we did is we solicited, and instead of doing something about Gilbert, we wanted to open it to the world and hear everyday people's stories. So we asked people to submit a photograph, and answer a couple of questions about the rainbow flag. And we got submissions from over 40 countries around the world. We put it together in an exhibit. Michelle was kind enough to get us an amazing catalog designer. And that exhibit has been around the world. It's been in New York. It was at the Stonewall Park. It's been in San Francisco, Napa Valley, Russian River, Boston, Provincetown, Paris, London, Leeds Museum, and then last spring we took it to the Euro Pride celebration in Malta. So it's been a hugely popular exhibit, but you know, the exhibits are kind of nice to do in terms of scholarship, but really the most important thing we're doing now is our activist work. It was about 2 years ago, I got contacted by a friend who said, Charlie, they just banned the rainbow flag in Cold Spring, New York. And I'm thinking, Cold Spring, New York, Upper Westchester, bougie Cold Spring, you know, and suddenly we looked it up and we realized people were banning the rainbow flag in these small towns in Oregon and Utah and around the country. There were about 10 of them at that point. So we reached out to the ACLU and partnered with them to create an initiative called Save the Rainbow Flag. By the time we announced that initiative 6 months later, there were bans in over 37 cities and school districts around the country. That was a year and 3 months ago. And so we started fighting back. We organized, we worked with local activists all across the country, providing them with the legal framework from the ACLU. And I'm very pleased to say that we've been managed to fight back and overturn or prevent bans in California, Maryland, New Jersey, and in Florida. I wish we'd done more. They keep coming faster than we can fight them. I think as of today, there's over 50 towns and school districts where they've banned them. We are happy to say that we have 2 federal lawsuits going, one in Hamtramck, Michigan, and one in Kennequot, Long Island, where they told a teacher to take down his rainbow flag. So, and by the way, when I say banning the flag, it doesn't matter if it's Gilbert's flag, the Progress flag, or the trans flag. If they're banning one of our community's flags, we are there fighting to overturn that ban. And just this, you know, and we're still working with groups across around the world. People that we met in the Flag and the Map initiative. We're still working with people in Kenya, you know, who submitted a story. We're working with activists in the Ukraine right now. I'm very happy to say that when we were at Europride, we gave an original signed Gilbert Baker flag to activists from Ukraine, and they just this past Sunday had their first Pride celebration in 4 years because of the war there. And we're really proud that we were part of that. We're able to help them. So we work internationally with people, but our big work right now is here trying to fight this rollback of our rights. And just this month, we launched something called Defiant Pride. It's a new initiative. I kind of call it our Star Wars Rebels project because we are working with people who are literally defying these bans. You know, people who will get up on a flagpole and raise a rainbow flag in front of a city hall where it's been banned, and they have people that have been arrested. And or in Florida, I love this story. The governor there banned putting rainbow colors on bridges, which different towns would do for their pride. And so in Jacksonville, Florida, hundreds of citizens got flashlights and put colored gels on their flashlight and lined up across this bridge to light that bridge in rainbow colors in defiance of their horrible, bigoted governor who is trying to erase our symbol and erase our community. So we're fighting back, and we're fighting hard.
You have an amazing way of ending an answer and a story with just such an incredible punch. It gives me chills. But yeah, that was an amazing answer, and it really is heartening to hear that that Gilbert Baker's legacy is in hands that are willing to go to bat for it and to keep doing what he would do had he been here.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to unshare.
I could say
this
real quick, gilbertbaker.com, savetherainbowflag.com, defiantpride.com. I got to put in the plug, or my partners will never forgive me.
Yes, please do. Everyone, please pay attention to what
It's all at gilbertbaker.com, by the way. You can see it all there.
Okay, and so my last question is right, and then we'll get to the Q&A part. So if people want to start pondering their questions. But my last question is for both Charley and Michelle, who I think have touched on this already. But the world has dramatically changed since Baker created this flag in 1978. Why is the flag still so important? And I guess partially to start it off, I mean, in this last answer, Charley, we really heard about how it has international prominence and there's people fighting to make sure that we have this right to continue to express ourselves. So maybe I'm wondering if Michelle, you have anything to say about that, and Charley, anything to add on?
Absolutely. Well, I think, Charley, you made such a powerful argument in your last answer. When I think about why it remains such an important symbol, I know that when people have participated in the kind of narratives of the exhibitions that you've produced, Charley, the ways folks have been able to tell their own stories through those exhibitions and books, many times they have talked about the idea that, you know, they can see this flag and they know that someplace is safe for them. They know that it is a place of community. They know that if it is out, they are welcome in that space. And again, as Charley said, that's, you know, Gilbert's flag, it's the progress flag, it's the trans flag, these particular designs, these textiles, these physical objects offer people a space of safety, a space of community, a space of belonging. And I don't think that's a feeling that ever should go away or is necessary to go away. People need that as part of creating a sense of self, but also a sense of being and belonging with others. In distinction to that, as Charley was also describing, we are still in a moment in time where people stoke hate. I'm a scholar, most of the time, a historian, a curator of women and gender studies. And often when I talk about designs related to that area, I say, you know, misogyny doesn't change, it just changes shape. It doesn't go away. It's always present in some sense. And I think that is the same for different forms of discrimination and hate, especially those that are experienced by the wider LGBTQ plus community. And so the flag remains important because it is a symbol of pushing very hard against those things. But I, in many ways, like to think about what it is for as well, which is for this sense of being able to own one's own identity and to be doing that in community with others and to do it in a space of love. I was so lucky to meet Gilbert, and I mean, you knew him much better than I did, Charley, but he's just struck me as a person who is all about love, like really just devoted to his friends, so happy to be part of the communities that he was part of. And at least when I met him, just like the most gregarious and wonderful person to be around. And so for him, this was an incredibly positive contribution to a larger conversation about how to love oneself and love the communities that you could be a part of. But I don't know, Charley, what do you think?
Well, yeah, and you know, I know that having the flag come to MoMA really amplified its meaning and meant the world to Gilbert, by the way, just meant the world to him. A year later, he was giving a rainbow flag to President Obama. The day they unveiled the rainbow flag at MoMA was the day they lit the White House up on the day of the marriage equality ruling from the Supreme Court, which again amplified it because then they went and lit up the Eiffel Tower and the Bay Bridge in Sydney and the Niagara Falls. I mean, the whole world, and this symbol that was already worldwide became ubiquitous. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. If you see a rainbow flag, people know what it means. And I would just go to one other thing too. And, you know, I think it goes back to, you know, Michelle, why you wrote the book. It's very important to Gilbert, and I've really gotten this from the research, especially from his speech to the vexillological associations, this concept of the rainbow of humanity. You know, this is also Michelle's flag because she feels like she's part of this rainbow of humanity. Do you know what I mean? Being an ally is just as much as being LGBTQ. And if you want to be part of that world where you're accepting people of all genders, sexuality, races, and ages, then you're part of that rainbow. That's what was important to Gilbert, because people say, oh, who's it for? What's it for? And it's really for an idea. And if you're part of that idea, then that's part of your flag. So when you do see it at a cafe in Rome or, you know, some building in, you know, Yugoslavia, you know that like, oh, wow, there's not just gay people here, but there's just people that think like I do and that think that, you know, humanity should be an open and welcome place.
I love that, Charlie. I'll just finish maybe by saying the story of when we hung it, first of all, which was on the 25th of June in 2015. We had just acquired it into the museum about just shy of 2 weeks before that. And we knew we wanted to put it on display. We couldn't until it was a collection object, but we knew we wanted to put it into the design galleries near these other symbols. And as is anyone who's ever worked in a museum knows that sometimes you take things too slowly or you just really try and make it perfect. And so we'd had probably more than 3 or 4 meetings about what was the correct flagpole to use and where should it be and what should the angle of the flagpole be, et cetera, et cetera. And then this wonderful news came down from the Supreme Court decision, and Paula said, somebody go out and get a flagpole right now. We're putting it up today. It would be wonderful. And so the flagpole came from a hardware store just down the road from MoMA. We had a wonderful preparator in the department at the time, Pamela Popeson, who was just phenomenal to work with. And through a combination of many different people at the museum, we raised it, and there was the preparator on the step stool drilling in the flagpole and then putting it up. And as we did it, a lot of people came down, staff members, people kind of stopped around and were in the gallery. And there was this beautiful kind of waiting for it to be unfurled. And then it was unfurled. And there was this lovely moment. You know, some people it meant a huge amount that this was in their workplace or this was in the museum that they were, you know, happened to be visiting that day. So there was some really, tearful moments, but there was this wonderful warm applause and then like a lot of really good celebratory whooping as well. And it was one of those moments that I don't think I'll ever forget. It really makes me happy to think about it still. But it was one of the reasons I was like, oh yeah, this is why I work in a museum. This is the kind of story that we want to be telling here. This is the kind of object that can help us tell that story. So yeah, thank you.
That's a very heartwarming story. And yeah, I guess it shows the power of the symbol and then what it means when you have the symbol in these institutions that are representing our collective history. Okay, that was amazing. Thank you both so much. I'm going to shift over for the little time we have left to Q&A. We have a long question here that I will read out loud from Akshara. So I think we actually talked about this a little bit, but I do think it's worth saying. The role of the flag the role that flags have played in empire and conquest through time, but especially within the context of nationalism as we understand it today within modern nation states, makes the rainbow flag even more powerful. From Charley's narrative about Baker's vision of the flag, where other flags have been historically fomented tribalism and easily categorizable boxes that help define ins and outs, Baker's flag was designed to subvert what a flag can represent in its entirety, capturing the rainbow of humanity in such a way that is utterly inclusive and highlights how the removal of any color and marginalization of any person will always fall short. How do you see the pride flag in relation to other movements for social justice?
I'll take that quickly. Thank you. That's a great question. Just a couple things. It's a, you know, as Gilbert said, it was not to be a national flag, and it was to really represent this idea. And I think the idea that you know, you pull any part out of it and the fabric just kind of gives way is really important. And you know, just that it's not a national flag. It's not a flag to make war. It's a flag to make peace.
I love that, Charlie. And I would say also, in terms of that question about how it relates to other movements for social justice, whenever I talk about design in my job or in writing or other things, I'm often doing it because I work at a museum and it's a sort of visual place where you're often told that your main product is an exhibition of some sort. I'm often doing it through the lens of an object or sort of physical design in some way, but it's really important to me all of the time to say that, you know, from the rainbow flag to any other work of art that I might be engaging with at the museum, everything has a person or people behind it. These are things, yes, they make the world around us in a material way, but design is always people. These material accoutrements or material vestiges of our world are always brought into being by living organisms. I will not always say people, actually, they can be animals, they can be plants as well. We live in a multi-species and multi-organism environment. And I think that's really important to think about when we think about how this flag or this particular design relates to other movements for social justice. I think it relates because it comes from people who asked for better, who asked for different, who demanded their full humanity to be recognized. And I think that's what really good design does, no matter what it is for, no matter what the social or practical need or issue is, what the movement towards social justice is for, that it is coming from people's lived experiences. And this is a way that what they make can be representative of those experiences and to move us forward in directions that we need to.
Yeah, and if I can add real quick, Gilbert knew when he did it, it was very subversive to choose the rainbow. We see some flags with clenched fist. That has a connotation. The rainbow is, it's, people kind of chided him way back and said, oh, it's so pretty and it's all like, happy and all this stuff. And he said, that's the point, is that we're choosing a symbol. I mean, it provokes in a way that is all about hope. So how can you, how are you going to denigrate this symbol? Do you see what I'm saying? It's built into the design that he chose something that has been historically for tens of thousands of years a sign of hope. So it was a very subversive thing to do when he did it, because it was at a time of protest when there were a lot of clenched fists back then, and even with the Black Lives Matter, the same thing. So choosing that design was very clever.
Okay, and in our last 3 minutes, I'm going to segue to our other question, which was kind of perfect because you talked about how this flag has been used across time and across movements, and I imagine that this would look very different if it was not in the public domain. So that being said, how important was it for Gilbert to keep the flag in the public domain? Cassie has asked.
Well, I'll just say real quick, a year after he created the flags, the people who ran the Pride Foundation in San Francisco thought they were going to make a buck off this thing. And they went and they said, oh, well, we paid for the fabric and we paid for the dyes. And they tried to treat it as work for hire. So Gilbert went down found a young lawyer on Castor Street in San Francisco, a guy named Matt Coles. And he said, I got a problem. These people are trying to copyright the flag. And he said, oh, you want to copyright it? And he said, no, I want to give it to the world. It was very important to him that it be in the public domain. Almost all of our flags are in the public domain. There's maybe one other one that isn't. I think that's a problem, but it's important that it is in the public domain. Gilbert always used to get asked this question, oh, did you make any money off of it? And he would say, no, you don't get the point. It is his gift to the world. Matt Coles went on to be a really big lawyer at the ACLU. And I think it was some 20 some years later, Gilbert caught up to him in New York and brought him a rainbow flag.
That is very sweet and full circle. Okay, and with that, right on time, Michelle has another Pride tour today, so extra thank you to Michelle for making time for us. Extra thank you to Charley for also making time for us. We're so excited to have had this event. We're going to post it online so that we can share it with the world and continue to share Baker's story. Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you for bearing with me during this technological issue that we had at the beginning. I'm so grateful to our guests and to our panelists, and thank you so much. And if you're curious about the Pride flags in the Gross Museum, in the Heckscher Museum, come see our show, George Gross, the Stickman.
Fantastic. Happy Pride, everyone. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Jessica.
Bye.
Happy Pride.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.